understanding the wind when it comes to mature whitetails is probably the biggest thing that can go right or can go wrong, but it's one of the biggest influencers in the deer woods, especially on mature deer. So we're going to talk about today is actually understanding, going the extra mile, and really understanding a few things that relate to mature deer mentality and the wind and how you can use it to your favor, and what setups you should be even looking at in attempts to even conquer that hurdle of beating the nose of a mature buck. We all like to talk about the when we're in the stand, and one of the biggest crucial things that you have to think about is on the ground. It's not so much what you're beating. It's a huge tool we're going to talk about here, about what you have to beat and how you know how to go about beating the nose of a mature buck when you're in the stand, where to blow your wind, and all that stuff ties into it. But one of the biggest things is, guys, is I always recommend, and I really encourage you guys to, if you follow along, and I'll do my best to try to explain this the best as we can, as far as leaving that trail of scent behind you. And I don't, there's a lot of great products. We use the no scent elimination system. But guys, there's nothing that beats just not leaving it there at all. And so, not cutting the line of travels, not walking all over your food plots. Today I was out here, and this is the test plot, obviously, so I do a lot more things here than I do on a like a leased ground or the property that we just bought, or client properties, or anything here. Today we were walking around here, obviously on the outsides. If you have to go into these locations, don't make a maze all over it. Have a set pattern where you go in, you come out. So instead of it being laid all over that area, it's a one line in, one line out. That's one of the things that we're going to start with. A lot of it ties to being in the stand and your scent funnels and scent cones, but we're going to start the video today with just that. Just make sure that before you even get to the stand, before you even worry about wind and try to beating the nose of a mature buck, make sure that you are not, you're leaving that scent pattern, that scent trail, scent web, whatever you want to call it, on the ground. Make sure that that's not dispersed all over your property, especially small properties. It's a huge destruction. It can be a huge detrimental piece to the hunting puzzle. So that kind of ties in to the rest of the video here, where we're going with the wind and how to beat the nose of a mature buck. So now that we've set the precedence or the pattern that we're not going to lay these scent webs, or we're not going to disturb the ground, and we're going to make sure that we're clean when we're going in to check cards. Now we're in the stand. Now we've made it to the stand. What are a few things that really stand out and that we have to acknowledge when we're going into that next step of trying to beat that nose of that mature buck? One of the biggest things is, to me, guys, as I see, is I'm a huge site access property consultant. I encourage all my small parcels, large parcels. It gets a little more tricky on large parcels because you really got to watch your internal movement and where your food's at. Small parcels, guys, if you're out there tuning into this and you're in a high pressured state, please take this into consideration. Is when I set up a stand, I want the wind in my face, but I do not want the deer a lot of the time the deer coming at me. And a lot of times what I see is folks are let's just use a food plot here for example. We're hanging a stand on this side of the plot, and the deer are bedded on that side of the plot, and the wind is in our face, so we are beating the nose of the deer, right? Well, the problem with that is if, unless you have, which I don't encourage the plot hunting at all, you guys know that, but unless you have something to dump that scent into in the back that goes over a ravine or goes down into your fence row where there's non-deer area, or out into an old pasture or something like that, what happens is, what I see a lot of is, just because the wind is in your face, when the deer come out into a plot area, or they transition through a transition area, if you're not hunting on the edge of the food plots and they're transitioning past you, the thought process and the theory is to keep the wind in my face. And as the deer transition past me, then they're out of picture, and I don't have to worry about them anymore. Well, the problem with that, guys, is when you hunt an inline pattern, not a T pattern, I call it an inline pattern. When you hunt the inline pattern of a deer coming at you and the wind is in your face, you're obviously thinking correct. The problem with that is when your scent cone leaves you behind it doesn't taper down, it tapers out. So it goes from you, it goes from your location out behind you. And the problem with hunting at that inline scent strategy is the wind is coming in your face, the deer get behind you, and at some point they have a possibility to pick you off behind your stand location. Yes, you beat them coming to you, so you could kill them. So everybody says, well, if you know, as long as they get past me, and you know, if they're worth shooting, then I'll shoot them before they wind me. You got to think farther down the road than that. I do not like giving them the wind or giving a chance to wind at all. And the reason for that is this. So take that inline pattern out, and I'm going to tell you how you cure that. But first of all, take the inline pattern out. And the thing you have to think about on inline wind patterns is if you're in let's take it out of the food plot and let's go into a transition area where you're between bedding and feeding, and you set the stand up, and you know that they're going to transition from bed. You're in let's say a morning sit, pre-rut. You've got the deer coming back from feed, and he's going back towards his bed, and you've got him coming past you, and he's transitioning right at the stand. He's going to walk, 20, 25 yards in front of you and continue on behind you, and if you don't get the shot opportunity, and then you're okay. Problem with that, guys, is on early season you might get away with that. When it's a direct line, it's a direct path from feed back to bedding in a morning hunt. The problem with that is if you were hunting those stands, let's say there's a licking branch in front of it, or that's a powerful spot that you've stayed away from all year, and then you get to that pre-rut that, let's use Halloween week as a timeline here, when things are really starting to happen, and you set that up and you leave that alone, and you dive into that stand, and that buck comes past you on a morning sit, coming back from feed, going back to his bed, and he gets past you. The problem with it is unlike early season, there's a high chance of that deer not going back and staying in his bed. What he's going to do is he's going to go back to his bed. What I find is the mature deer mentality is, I want to get back to my bed right at that first hour of daylight, if not sooner. I want to get back to my bed, and then I want to check that bed, and I want to leave my precedence there. He wants to let that area know that, hey, this is my house, stay out of my bedroom, and he checks it. He might eat one of those feed times patterns, or one of those feeding times internal of his bedding area. Hopefully the browse is there for him to do that, and then he gets up, and then what happens is he's going to transition from that location. If hopefully it's it's an opportunity that you're in that spot, but if he's going to transition back out into the field, let's say back onto the field, and he's coming from the dugout, let's say, and he's coming back into the field. The problem with that is, guys, is he's coming back into where you're at. Now he's in charge. Now his nose is to the wind. So now you are in that, you've waited to hunt that cruising time period, and you just let him get, he got past you, whether it was too dark maybe, and you didn't get a shot opportunity in the morning, and he got past you. And now he's working his way back out, and he's cruising. Now he's going to come back out and check scrapes. He's going to check your licking branch. The problem with that now is, he's in charge, because he's got his nose to the wind. And what happens is, time and time again, is that's when you get busted. It might not be that first golden 20-30 minutes, first hour of daylight, but that 10 o'clock time when things start cruising, that's when you can get busted. That's why I do not like to hunt the inline pattern wind patterns. So how do I cure that, or what do I recommend doing? I set up all my stands on a T-wind pattern. So in other words, side access into your stands. So instead of sitting on the edge here looking out and have the deer transition to you, I want the deer moving left to right, right to left. I want the deer moving in front of me. And the reason for that, one guys, is outside of the scent spectrum here, is one thing is it's a very powerful tool when those deer are coming past you, perpendicular to you, and they are running away from you or sideways. They're checking the scrape, and when they pick their heads up, they're looking away from you. They're not looking at you, and they continue on underneath, and they continue back, and they can cruise. So just that setup that we talked about before, when that buck goes past, and then at 10 o'clock he gets back up out of his bed, and now he wants to start cruising, checking scrapes, and now his nose is in the wind. If you're on the outside of that spectrum, And his line, if you're looking, let's say it's on a west wind and you're hunting the east side of your property line, you should be looking to the west. In that transition area, that trail, that transition area, especially if you can promote it with some habitat improvement, that transition area should be running north and south, not east and west. And if you're in that pattern, now you're in that T pattern that I related to. So that way, when he comes past you in the morning, and if it's too dark, same situation, same scenario that we had before, he gets past you, it's too dark, you can't get a bead on him, and he gets past you, or he's just outside the bow range, right at that that magical hour in the morning. He comes past you, gets past you, goes back to bed, checks that bed, makes that that dominant stand in his bedding area, grabs a bite to eat, he's on his feet again. And he's not at that point, we're at the end of October here, and he's not at that point where he's going to find a doe and he's locked down with a doe for hours upon hours upon hours. He's cruising, and now he gets back up out of his bed. Now he's coming back into the wind, and you're outside of that wind. So that leads us to the next step. What do we do so that cures kind of the pre-rut when he's cruising? Most of the time, a lot of times during the rut, aren't in their normal doe bedding areas. So if your farm is set up correct, if you're out on public ground and you found some feed location, or you're on your private piece and those does, you know where those does are at, and you're perfect, you've got a perfect setup, and you're behind the does, and the does are out in front. The problem with that, guys, is when those does within that 24 to 28 hour period, when those does are in peak estrus, they like to do exactly what the does do. It's a privacy thing. They kind of take themselves out of the equation. Well, if they move outside of that doe bedding area, and that's where he locks that doe down, now you really got to watch how they're getting back to their daily playbook, if you will. So now that's another spectrum of really focusing on what puts them in charge, because the object here is the last thing we're going to talk about is that's what makes a morning hunt so powerful, is because at some point they have to get back into they have to go back to their playbook, and they have to put themselves back in charge of the wind. And what happens is when their playbook is in their favor, their nose is into the wind, going out to their destination or heading to their destination feed locations in the evening. So now you have to change. That's where sitting in the same stand that you sat in the morning, is it an evening stand? Very few stands. I'm lucky enough to have one here on the home farm, but very few of those stand locations are a morning and an evening sit, just for that reason. So the last thing that we're going to talk about today, guys, is understanding during what makes a morning hunt so powerful, is because let's say it continues to be a northwest wind. In the evening, he gets up and he's putting his nose to the north or northwest, and he's going out, and he gets past you, and you don't have a successful evening hunt. Now he's out there, and you go into a morning setup where you're going to catch him coming back in the morning to bed. What makes that morning hunt so powerful, guys, is at some point on a northwest wind, he cannot physically get back into that bed. If he left on a northwest wind, he cannot get back into that bedding area, in that bed in the morning, without having the wind to his back. At some point, he has to go back into that bedding area, and the wind's in your favor, not in his, and that's what makes a morning hunt so powerful. So the object is how do you beat that? And that's why that T style of side access during the wind is so important, because if you were to put yourself back in that pattern when he's coming right back at you in the morning, and if you aren't successful to kill him, and it doesn't happen, and he gets back past you, that's when all that ties back into things can happen. He gets back into his bed, and what I see a lot of is deer that are in less than perfect habitat. If your transition areas aren't thick and that real edge isn't defined, what happens is deer wander. So they're coming at you, they get behind you, they find whatever is during that day because of the weather, that if they heard something, whatever, they can be 40, 50, 60 yards off a path behind you, going back into their bed, and that's when that scent cone can get you into trouble. So perfect habitat is when it's real thick and they transition back by and they feel secure, they're usually on those trails unless something really drastically goes wrong. Limbs are down over it, trees had fallen across it, maybe predators have, come in, coyote dens, whatever the case is. You have to know on a morning's hunt like that is how to beat the nose, and to that is your golden ticket. Let's say, is he's going to get back into there, trying to get back into that bed with the wind against him, not in his favor. So at some point, that's when you can really be successful, is if the wind is consistent on let's say a 24 to 48 hour period. So watching the wind when you're going to hunt in the future is key. So if you know that the wind is going to stay out of the northwest, on that scenario, the wind's going to stay out of the northwest for not only 24 but 48 hours, at some point during that morning or the morning after, he's going to come back through there. If he's traveling in that pattern and your cameras are showing you that, he's coming back in there with the wind against him. That brings up the last topic that we're going to chat about here. You have to go back and look. Use these cameras to go back and look in the past. The historic wind, not the future wind. Historic winds will finish this wind spectrum of making you very, very, very successful as a deer hunter with mature bucks. So understanding historic winds, not just winds in the future. A lot of attention is we get to camp or we're going out to the property, and I'm going to look about this hunt, I'm going to look about the next hunt, I'm going to look 2 or 3 days out. I got to find out where the wind, I got to find out where to be. What you need to do, guys, is you need to use these tools as the most powerful ticket in your pocket and go back on historic winds, pull these cards or take these pictures that the cell cams are showing you, and go back and say, hey, I'm here hunting on a Friday evening. I'm going to be at the property all weekend. I've got this buck on camera. I pulled the card and he's on this camera, and he was here Tuesday or Wednesday. What was the wind? He was at that stand in the morning when I want to hunt. He's there on that licking branch or stopped at that water hole. When was he there? Knowing the historic wind will finish the deal, will seal the deal for you as a hunter, being successful, like I said, on mature bucks, is because that is it. He is telling you, he's giving you the playbook. He's letting you look inside of his playbook, if you will, on what he's done in the past. Unless he gets bumped off that pattern, unless something happens, another predator or whatever the case is, unless something happens, food changes, something happens in this bedding area, that will deter him from that. But if he has done that in the past, and you can prove that he did that on one morning it was a south wind, the next morning it was a southeast wind, that the next time you have to be into that set, is he's going to do that same thing, going back to bed with a southeast wind. And the reason for that is probably the way that he's entering back in there is the wind isn't totally against him. The wind is quartering at him going back in there. They will do anything. They will use contour, they will use edge, they will sacrifice themselves across open fields at times, whatever the case is, to use a quartering wind to get back to bed. Now, the ticket is if you can be in the right spot and the wind is in your favor when they are trying to accomplish that in the morning. Because like I said, the difficult part is beating them once they come back out of the bed on a cruising situation, or once they're coming back out of the bed going back to the feed in the evening. That's when it gets tricky. The mornings should be because they are, like I said, the wind's against them. They can't possibly get back in there without going against the wind, and they have to be back into that setting. That's the early morning possibilities that you have. The things you have to watch for, like I said, guys, that's where that T, using that T pattern that I will teach here is that I use and I give to my clients, is because that T pattern always keeps you outside of that spectrum of if he goes back to bed and he wants to get up an hour later, he wants to get up 2 hours later, he wants to get up in the evening, if you plan on hanging on the stand all day during the rut, whatever the case is, whenever he comes back into the wind, you're not going to get in trouble. That's a couple tips, guys, on how to keep you ahead of the game when it comes to wind. Thanks.